Hello, everybody!
Turn this up in my headphones, Charles.
Turning it up. Hello, everybody, one and all. Welcome to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend, Charles.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend, Dylan, as well, but not just any fantasy today, because today we are revisiting our conversation that just could not be contained into one episode, and that is our discussion of Best Served Cold, Book 4 of the First Law universe, a standalone in its own right by none other than the great Joe Abercrombie, Lord Grimdark himself.
Right, and I was so glad we split this into two parts because what was the last one, like an hour and 20 minutes?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, geez, I hope we're moving at a pace where we can fit it in two parts. So I feel like we did get probably about halfway.
Right.
And I'm happy that we pulled that off, and I'm really excited to tackle the rest of this, like in part one, which good time to go back to if you haven't heard that yet. Like part one, we're going to have a no-holds-barred conversation with spoilers through Best Served Cold, which means that the original First Law trilogy is also going to be fair game for spoilers in this episode, as is everything that happens in Best Served Cold, but we won't spoil anything in the First Law universe beyond that. And other than that, yeah, I'm ready to get into this, Charles.
Yeah, well said. Ye be warned. There's spoilers ahead, and without any more delay.
I forgot my signature line.
Oh, you did.
How could I forget? So now's a good time to turn this. Yeah, it was super close. Now's a good time to turn this down in your headphones if you haven't already read Best Served Cold and you don't want to get that spoiled for you.
Yes, great. And with that, let's pick up right where we left off. So things went haywire at Cardotti's House of Leisure.
That it did.
Monza runs in with Chazal, Shivers and his opponent Greylock. It goes from a mock battle to a real battle. And we talked about that whole play on the revenge story by seeing it out of water with there's a fish out of water with Greylock here. And then Friendly is accused of having loaded dice, which is probably one of the biggest crimes committed in this whole book. And so Cardotti's burns to the ground. We do manage to sneak in our revenge while it's happening, and now Monza's crew is riding into Visserine. And here we get set up that Monza has a safe house in Visserine, and when they get there, it is revealed that there are squatters in the safe house. It's an innocent-looking family, and Morvir's like, well, let's kill them all, That's just what you gotta do. And Monza's like, you know what, after all the killing we've been through, I'm fine if they just stay in the first floor and we get the penthouse, and that works for me.
Yeah, and it's very interesting from the Snake of Tollins, who's always given the classic mercy and cowardice are the same type lines. Those are the axioms that she's embraced from her teachings, or at least claims to have, that she really, this is a situation where she has very little to gain personally by allowing these squatters to stick around and everything to lose. And she makes what I think is the much more moral decision to allow the squatters to just hang. And it, in classic Joe Abercrombie grimdark style, we like to say no good deed goes unpunished.
Yeah.
And this one will this good deed will go punished for her, and especially Shivers.
Yes, and absolutely. And to me, this is again what a part of what this book explores is like, where do you draw the line on when to be violent or non-violent, merciful, merciless? And they're always put in these scenarios. There's times where Manza's free to bash someone in piece by piece with a hammer, and then there's times where she just does not have the stomach to kill a single individual, even if she can greatly benefit from it. And you see Manza going, like, losing her taste for violence in certain parts, and getting that passion sparked back into her and others. And this is one of those moments where it's just explored. It's like, these people did nothing to you, but that's, your life would probably be better if they were gone. And I think just coming fresh out of Cardotti's, and then also what happened at Valen and Bach, she's looking to put some good back into the world, which, as Dylan mentions, goes most definitely punished, as it always does in a Lord Grimdark novel here. And that is when, of course, Manza and Shivers are captured. The squatters betray Manza.
Yeah.
That was the issue. And Manza was so focused on getting revenge on Genmark that she forgot that Duke Salier was there the whole time. And it was Duke Salier's forces that captured her and brought them to the castle.
And it's just the classic almost nihilism that we see in a lot of Joe Abercrombie's work here, where it's like the pointlessness of being captured by the side that you're actually, not that you're trying to help per se, but the side that would be helped by the thing that they're trying to do.
Right.
And yeah, to get captured by the wrong side because they have all these uniforms and things like that, and they think that they're spies. It's just, yeah, so such pointless violence that they end up going through, and that torture, those torture scenes that we end up getting are just absolutely brutal. And it's interesting that we get the chance sounds weird, we get to see what it's like on the other side of one of these torture scenes. We've been in the original First Law trilogy on the side of the torturer so much, and rarely have we been on the side of the tortured, and we get that here in Best Served Cold. And poor Shivers, man. Poor Shivers.
Yeah. It's a very intense scene, because first of all, just the pure senselessness of the situation in the first place.
Yeah.
Second of all, the truth doesn't do him any good. Lies don't do him any good. And we know Shivers' backstory. He was hired by Manza to do a job. He's relatively, in terms of conspiracy, innocent in all of this. I mean, he did murder a lot of people.
In terms of conspiracy, but not in terms of murder.
Yeah, not in terms... He's very guilty of murder. And it's like you said, Dylan, we're so used to seeing the torturer side. Even like Manza's vengeance on Gaba with the hammer felt very reminiscent to something we would see from Glokta in the First Law. But now we're seeing all of these things that Glokta used to describe, where Shivers was confessing everything and like trying to put it back on Manza and begging and going the whole gambit. And it doesn't help him one bit. The Lord Grimdark, Joe Abercrombie, goes into pretty vivid detail on this whole idea of putting the poker in the fire, getting it hot, squelching his eye out. I've noticed that while reading a lot of Abercrombie in a row, he loves the word squelch.
Interesting.
It's a word that I've never really thought of before, and then like he's used it in several different contexts, romantically and in violence as well. He's like, squelch, squelch. And you're like, squelch. But it's I don't know if he uses it in this particular scene, but he uses it quite a bit. He probably did use it in this scene, who knows? And yeah, it's an intense scene. And then, of course, what happens, Dylan, like 2 seconds later, Who arrives at the door but Casca himself. Because we know this was teased in the beginning. Casca's like, why don't we just go say, my name is Niccolo Casca and I'm here for dinner. And everyone's like,
famed soldier of fortune, Charles.
Yes,
don't forget
course.
famed soldier of fortune.
And I'm here for dinner. And they're like, that's a stupid plan. And then it's Vitari and Morvir are like watching from afar. And it's like, that's Casca. Yeah. He's walking right up to the gates.
It's such an amazing Casca moment. Because it's like, so here's the thing that I've been talking about and we'll get to Shivers and his eye, and we'll get to, I actually want to talk too about Monza and what she's going through in this moment as well. But to stick with Casca for a second, it's one of these things where this happens over and over again throughout this novel is you're supposed to think that Casca is just absolutely full of hot air, and in many ways he is. But in the most key ways throughout this novel, he consistently is not. He actually delivers over and over again on many things that you think are just bluster, and this is one of those times where he's like, no, I literally can just walk up there and say... yeah, the line when he's coming up with it, it's like Vitari asks, how the hell do you plan to make use of it? And he goes, I imagine I will address the guards at the palace gate and say something along the lines of, I'm Niccolo Casca, famed soldier of fortune, and I am here for dinner. And there was an uncomfortable silence, quite as if he had contributed a giant turd rather than a winning idea. So it's like you see everyone's reaction to it and you assume that it's like, okay, Casca's so off base again, but in this moment he completely delivers. That's exactly what he does, and it works, and it's so amazing. And it's actually believable too, because it's like, of course Casca's a winning dinner guest. Right. Why wouldn't he be?
Of course. And at this moment, it's like, why wouldn't Duke Salia invite them into his hall? He's under siege. He's got nothing to lose. They have a mutual enemy. I mean, why would he do anything other than at least... talk to them, if not have dinner. So it makes a lot of sense, and it ended up working just a moment too late for Shivers. And then I love Duke Salia's like, oh, an unfortunate bit of business that is.
Yeah.
It's just horrible.
Yeah. It is horrible. And I want to speak some to what Monza's going through during it, which is this interesting thing where the torturer is someone who actually admires Monza, or at least the idea of who Monza is supposed to be, right? The Butcher of Capril and all of that. And part of why she doesn't believe that Monza is who Shivers and Monza are claiming she is that she tells Monza later, she's like, oh, I thought that the Snake of Talons would be able to handle all that with a lot more of a just, I don't know if courage is the word used, but just like a stone-faced, like stoic type, such a hard person that you'd never be able to get them to crack, even in the worst circumstance. And during the moment, Monza's reacting just like a person. And I think that's one of the amazing things of Abercrombie's writing is the depth with which he writes his character, because there's so many characters that are supposed to be like these hardened warriors that go through these tortured scenes in other books and they just can't crack. And it's that Abercrombie attitude of like, really? When you're watching someone else get their eye burned out and you think you're next, you're not going to crack? It doesn't care. It doesn't matter who you are. Right. So I appreciate that about Abercrombie's writing, and that about Monza's depth as a character. It helps make her feel real rather than one of those like I don't know, like one-dimensional quote unquote strong female characters who just end up being don't feel like real people because the author tries to make them so hard,
right. And there's that moment when they're saved and she realizes that she's gonna be saved, that she just sobs uncontrollably, and she's like, naked on the floor of this hall in front of everybody, including Casca, just sobbing with relief.
Yeah.
And she just doesn't even think about like how that makes her look, which is important for someone who feels like they have to have this whole air and reputation of being hard and merciless.
Yes.
to have these moments. And like you said, Dylan, I think it just enriches her character. So
for sure.
Then, we get the dinner, this dinner
Charles,
that was promised. Yes.
on Shivers, did you notice the foreshadowing throughout the book for Shivers' eye situation? It's Did you?
Be more specific.
There's Well, do you want me to just say the stuff?
Yeah.
Sure. So in or his first point of view chapter, Shivers threatens to cut someone else's eye out.
Oh.
And yeah, then the more telling one is when there's, hold on, I'm getting this one up. There's a point where he says, be nice to get out of this with both his eyes. In Plans and Accidents is a chapter. And that is when they're kind of sneaking around the bank, I think.
Nice.
And then later, when he stabs that woman at Cardotti's, it describes her as having one eye staring at him. So it's just these constant moments with Shivers, if you've read this book before and are thinking about this, with him, especially the moment where he's like, it'd be nice to get out of this with both my eyes.
Yeah.
Where Abercrombie is just throwing us tons of hints about what's coming for Shivers, and it pays off in brutal fashion here.
Right. It reminds me of going back and rereading First Law and seeing all the chin moments, which is all, it's a little more obvious, obvious to someone reading for the second time, where he's like, he has the perfect chin. It's like, oh, I know where this is going. But yeah, that's interesting. That's a good catch. And it's not surprising me at all. It's very much his Abercrombie style. He can't help himself sometimes. And he's fun always on the reread.
Using one eye to wink at the audience.
Oh, there you go.
The reader.
And we get this amazing line, because again, we're talking about these vulnerable moments, and Shivers gets his plenty too, both when he was like confessing during the torture, which we know to expect from when Glokta was going through all the different stages that someone getting tortured goes through. And I remember where it's like, where Glokta admits to being like, I was crying and blubbering and admitting everything, and I did all those things, and it didn't really matter. And then that kind of repeats itself with Shivers. But then we get the line, should have been you, while he's recovering at night, while he's in agony over his eye, the severe burns, and just the immense pain I imagine he must be in while recovering. He's smoking the husk pipe. He's barely conscious throughout most of it, but should have been you. Very clearly stated in these scenes.
And it's that line and the guilt that it makes Monza feel that makes her unable to look at Shivers from that point on, and ruins their romantic relationship, not the physical damage of the eye. And I think it's probably hard for Shivers to differentiate between the two. He's going through quite a bit from this point of the novel on. But yeah, there's just no coming back from that for those two. And that relationship is all downhill from here.
Very true. One of the moments, though, that I do like in these scenes, we're talking about revenge and all that, and the satisfaction we get from revenge. There's these moments with Langrier, who is the woman that interrogated Shivers and essentially poked his eye out, where they're preparing for the mission, and Langrier and Monza are talking to each other about the mission, and I forget the line, but she says something about, it was nothing personal. It's just something that happened, this, that, and the other. And then Shivers just walks up directly to her, doesn't break his stride, and just cold-blooded murders her. And it's like, that is, nothing personal. and it's just a funny moment. And it highlights a turning point for Shivers, where you're like, okay, this man is changed, like irreparably.
Yeah, a dark humor moment, I would say. And I don't know, you feel for him because Shivers starts out this, at least claims to be optimist, and he is trying. I do I do get the sense that he's at least convincing himself that he's making efforts. And he does do a couple nice things at the beginning, and they're all, all the good deeds Shivers does at the beginning go punished, as is typical, and he ends up sliding back. And then this is every last bit of the, I don't know if excuse is the right word, but like every last bit of the reason he needs to just, I guess, fall victim to his baser instincts, Charles, and go full murder hobo, as they call it in the D&D community. Like, just kill anyone or anything that gets in his way. And that's pretty much what we're dealing with Shivers for the rest of this novel. Just no qualms about killing whoever.
Right. And it's this casual, cold behavior that Shivers is starting to exhibit now that will kind of carry him through this whole book, and his perspective has completely changed, and it will be interesting to talk more about that as we get more scenes with him. But first, we have our revenge on Genmark, and this is an interesting death scene. All of the deaths on Manza's course for vengeance are interesting, but this one is unique in that it's kind of like accidental and coincidental and convenient, because Genmark he stabs Casca, he's toying with Manza, and then he's just crushed by a statue.
Yeah. And can we also give credit to Casca for coming in for the save there with Manza? I mean, another moment where Casca, for all his bluster about selfishness, shows that deep down he does care about Manza and helps her. And I think without him, it's not like, it's classic Abercrombie, because it's not like Casca rediscovers all his greatness from his prime and is able to defeat the great Genmark in a duel, but it is that he's able to at least add another variable to the equation that gives the chance for this just freak accident to result in Genmark dying. Right. So, yeah, props to Casca. And
yeah, Casca also drops some great lines in this. Yeah, Genmark done. Casca is on the ground, bleeding out of his guts. And I love when Casca and Manza are talking, and Casca goes, "Forgive me." Manza goes, "I thought I was the one betrayed you." Casca says, "What does it matter now? Treachery is commonplace. Forgiveness is rare. I'd rather go without any debts." And then he goes, "Except all the money I owe on Aspria and Adjua and Dagaska. Let's say no debts to you anyway, and leave it at that." Which is such an honest Casca moment. And I love this idea. Treachery is commonplace. Forgiveness is rare. And that's... Can you think of anything more true to Casca's character than that?
No, and that's... I so adore Casca by the end of this novel, not just for the normal reasons that I think in the first Law trilogy shows up with, which is just being funny and the banter and the witticisms. It's like he brings in this one a level of wisdom and insight that is very rare among, I think, like a lot of the wisdom and insight that is spouted in the first Law is like implicit, like the reader's supposed to take it away from the mistakes of the characters and the like ways the characters are wrong. Like I think that's something that Abercrombie does deliberately, but I feel like he speaks more directly through Casca in a lot of ways, and this is one of those moments where I actually think this is, I don't know Joe Abercrombie, but I get the sense that a lot of Casca's lines are how Joe Abercrombie actually feels, because I don't think he himself is just like this. And there's some of them are like he has this part to him too.
Yeah, you have to give it to Casca. These are some of the most hopeful and positive themes of all of First Law. Like so much of it we get is like, the senselessness of violence, no good deed goes unpunished, this heir to power and to authority and to government. But in these moments, it's like, forgiveness is rare. It's like, that's actually one of the more glowing things we get out of this grimdark novel, and it comes from Casca. So I think that's how he stands out for me as well.
Yeah. And Abercrombie has recently been saying he doesn't love the Grimdark label, actually,
Right.
even though obviously he's Lord Grimdark himself, but it's like part of his brand, his Twitter handle and all this kind of stuff. So he's kind of entangled with it in a way where I think he feels it's pretty hard to remove himself. But
Hmm.
he doesn't love referring to his own work as grimdark nowadays, because I think a lot of how Abercrombie seems to think from my read of his work is like he's making all these points about the senselessness and pointlessness of violence because he himself thinks it's so ridiculous that people are like killing each other, that war happens, and that it's all just silly. I mean, silly kind of underplays it. It's like a euphemism. It's horrible and pointless. And I really think that's how Abercrombie sees all of this, and it comes through this more like cynical lens because people are doing this in the real world, and they're doing it in his fantasy novels, and he's kind of, I guess, lambasting it.
Right, right. And it's something to consider as we go through these books of like what is the like how much is it grim dark and how much is it something else, and I can see that from Abercrombie trying to break out of that mold because it sets too many expectations and sells some of the other themes short in these books, and
Yeah.
I can appreciate that. And it's revealed in some of these background, like, just to get back to the Manza Casca relationship. It's and it's I don't know. To me, it's such a interesting relationship because of this.
Hmm.
Uh, they're they were as it gets we get more backstory, we realize more and more that they kind of always were like honest and faithful to each other. You realize, I think right after this scene, you get the flashback as you get into Paranti, where it's that moment where where Manza quote betrays Casca, which
Yeah.
where they have all these phony wars and they just get paid to fake fight each other. But
Hmm.
then Benna encourages a real charge onto
Well,
Casca's men.
encourages is being too generous to Benna. Benna manipulates everything behind the scenes where Monza's in a position where it's all set up for her to betray Casca. Orso was already in on it. Everyone knows, and she'd have to stand up to everyone, including Duke Orso, her brother, all the other commanders of the Thousand Swords, and it just was a very, very big ask for her to do that when
Hmm.
Ben had pulled all the strings already. And I mean, she could have said no, but then it would have been someone else and not her. And it's just, yeah, we'll get more into like all these Benna reveals, but I'll say, yeah, like you're saying, Charles, Manza, yes, she betrayed Casca, but it's a lot more complex than that. And the fault lies with her least of anyone who was part of that betrayal, though some does lie with her.
Certainly, and it's again another one of these things that Ben is not a great person and was constantly playing Manza's hand, and
Yes.
like all of these hardened, bloodthirsty, merciless actions that are stuck with Manza's reputation were very much influenced, if not instigated, by Benna. So
Yeah.
and we get more and more of these reveals as we go on. So what Abercrombie's allowing us to do is buy into Manza as this person and then kind of relate to her once we get more of her backstory. It's kind of an interesting way to go about it, but I appreciate it because it allows us to buy into Manza as, the butcher of Capriel and all these other things. And then you see, oh, actually she was kind of conflicted about it, didn't really want to do it, those kinds of things, but she did go along with it in the end to protect her um, authority and to not seem like a weak leader. And a lot of times to stay on the same side as Benna. She's never gonna go against him. So really interesting reveals, and the more we get as this book progresses, the more interesting and complicated, as you said, this story becomes. So with Genmark crushed by a statue, Manza meets with Duke Rogant, and who is there but Ishri, one of Kalul's Gurkish eaters. We get the Gurkish into the fray here, and it's, as we know from the First Law trilogy, so much is dictated by Kalul and Baez, and now we kind of see a little bit of them, a little more of them, and how they're playing the sides. And this is why, we always recommend, yes, Best Served Cold is a standalone, but by reading the First Law trilogy first, you get the sense of like, oh, we're seeing like the others, like this is a team of people who are being influenced by Kalul now, and it just adds a little bit of fun to the background here.
Yeah, and we've also got Shanked in the background of all of this, who it's kind of slowly being revealed. If you've already read the First Law trilogy and you're reading this now, it's being hinted at and then eventually revealed that Shanked was an apprentice of Baez. So
and before then it was revealed that he was an eater.
And
because there was that whole scene where he killed all these people and then like cut the fillet, and he's like, oh, how could anyone eat rare meat? That's so, disgusting. It's like as he's butchering a human being, which we know it's not just a cannibal.
So is sulfur. So is Uru sulfur.
Yep.
And so, so it's like you get the sense it's the slow reveal, so they can do that whole like Shanked actually was trying to not kill Manza thing at the end. But yeah, it's interesting to see those forces at play in the background. I wonder what it's like reading Best Served Cold without any of that. I'm sure it still works because people recommend it as a standalone, but I guess you're missing out on like exactly what's going on.
Yeah, you probably just
scenes.
kind of accept certain things. Like, oh, that's weird that he eats people. And it's like, oh, he's an eater. And then you're like, what's an eater? I don't think they explain what eaters are in this book.
Not really.
So you have to be like, what's an eater? And you're like, oh, it's a thing in the magic system in this world. Got it. It doesn't take away from the main story here or any of the themes or anything like that. So you can get almost 90% of the way there. But there are this fun 10% of like, oh, all these people, like the Jazal moment, like that, just you could read it without knowing who Jazal is, but getting his whole POV throughout the First Law trilogy and then seeing him in these moments, it's like, come on, you get Batari, you get Carla Den Eider, you get mentions of the cripple, like, all these fun Easter egg things in here, which aren't necessary for the plot, but makes it worth reading the First Law trilogy first, for sure. That's just my thing about it. But to get back to the plot here, Friendly has seen battle, he's seen war, and he is just not cool with it. He's a man of order, he's a man of numbers, and when he witnessed battle, it was just pure chaos, and it actually
exactly
it freaked him out. It caused him to almost have like a nervous breakdown, and he's like, I'm done with this, and I haven't heard from what's his name in a while, his boss, who was killed by Shanked. And when his name, I have it in our notes here.
Well, keep going, I'll find it.
But anyway, so he was killed by Shanked, and then so Friendly was like, I haven't heard anything. Oh, Sajam. He's like, oh, I haven't heard anything from Sajam in a while, and I really don't enjoy...
Who's dead, by the way, at this point.
Right,
if
killed by Shanked.
Or at least will be soon, because Shanked,
Yeah, Shanked had already killed him by this point. And Sajam is like, I always knew she'd be the death of me, like that Manza would be the death of me, and so he was not wrong. And so Morveer decides to take over the cooking, and there's this fun scene where he makes an honest attempt to connect with everyone and do everyone a favor, which is uncharacteristic of Morveer. He's a pretty selfish guy, and he's like, oh, I'll make a nice dinner for everybody, and no one touches it. It's because he's a poisoner, and he's poisoned them in the past. Except for Shiver. Shiver's just like, oh, who cares anymore? I'll eat whatever.
Yeah.
which is kind of another funny hint into Shiver's new character, I'd say. It's almost like, well, whatever
Nothing left to
happens is going to
lose.
happen. Nothing left to lose. That's exactly right. And the soup gets spilled, and Morvir gets embarrassed. It's just a funny little moment where it's like the kind of the last attempt Morvir makes to do good.
Yeah, and it's funny seeing Morvir just completely unable to understand why people wouldn't want to eat his food.
Yeah.
It's like, come on, Morvir. Seriously?
Yeah, I do like
Why is
all
it
the
so hard?
poisoner shenanigans that go on like throughout the whole book. All right, so in our next scene here, Shiver is going to faithful Carpi in what seems to be his attempt to his story is that he's here to betray Manza, and for some reason faithful Carpi buys into that. I mean, Shivers plays a very convincing role, and we know that this is kind of parallels what actually happens later in the book when Shivers actually does betray Manza. But for now, it is a ruse. And meanwhile, Morvir is contemplating betraying Manza, which this has been built up for a while. Manza's kind of been whispering into Day's ear. Day's Morvir's assistant. And it's finally the moment has come where Morvir's like, maybe I should betray Manza instead. And Morvir Manza was like, look out, Day, because the minute he tries to betray me, he's going to pin it on you. So Day is shocked and attempts to kill Morvir.
Yes, she does. Yeah, and it's funny because in Morvir's completely unreliable point of view, we do have him over and over again talking about how much he adores Day and would, and he's, and he's also like, I could never let her know how much I admire her, all this kind of stuff. And then when he is thinking in the moment of a scapegoat, he's gravitating a lot more toward Shivers and things like that. But it's already implanted in Day's head that it's going to be her. And yeah, she has a reaction to it of trying to take him down. And what's interesting is we do get later a reveal from Morvir that he totally would have scapegoated Day.
Yeah.
So that's a funny, black humor moment from Joe Abercrombie there. But in this moment, Day tries to take down Morvir
with the King of Poisons.
The King of Poisons, yes.
Which is just
classic.
Water. And then Morvir's like, but I poisoned you, and only I have the antidote. And then the antidote was actually a poison. It was like all these kooky poisoner shenanigans.
Yeah, and it's, that's how Day ends up going down, and you hate to see it.
And then it's like that Eric Andre meme where it's like Eric Andre shoots Hannibal Buress. It's like, oh my God, well, how could they have done this? Where Morvir's like, how could they have done this? It's so tragic that this happened. Meanwhile, it's like, you murdered her, dude. You got a little insecure that she tried to kill you, and then you fed her a boatload of poison.
Yeah, I mean, we have this moment where if Morvir was not Morvir, it seems like they're going to have maybe a heart-to-heart, and it's going to be like, okay, clearly Manza turned us against each other. I was never going to scapegoat you, and they could have talked it out. But Morvir is Morvir, and once you betray Morvir, you don't ever get back in his good graces. He does not forgive, and he does not forget, and we won't forget you, Day.
No. Nope, we won't forget sweet, hungry Day. Gone.
I would have thought, I guess it was like a red herring, or maybe it was just a character thing. When I saw the poisoner's assistant is someone who's eating all the time, and Morvir's always like, oh, like most poisoners die by their own agents. I'm like, she's going to go down. The first time I read it, I was like, she's going to go down by eating something poisonous, but it ended up being, I don't know if it was intentionally a red herring from Abercrombie, but it's not how she goes down.
That's true. I think it's just like that character quirk is kind of funny because you would think that a poisoner would be a little more judicious about what they decide to eat and when they decide to eat, but they just like lackadaisically is always munching on something. And yeah, you would think that it would just be super easy to poison some food that's nearby and let they just eat it, but instead we get all of these shenanigans where it's like, oh, I poisoned you, that's not a real poison, I poisoned you, and here's the antidote, oh, the antidote's the poison. And then like Morveer is just lamenting over the body for like a long period of time. He's like, oh, how could this be? It's so sad. And then like, you know, the body relieves itself. Day's body relieves itself. Morveer's like, oh, ew, gross. You know, and then he's like kicks her body, I think, for a while. Yeah. Like he gets mad at her. He goes through these gauntlets of emotions and you're like, oh, this man is unhinged. he's not all there.
He is not all there, and he is all out of there as soon as he can once the battle really starts raging, and that's the last we see of him as a part of this merry fellowship.
That's right. He's like, oh boy, I gotta get out of here. And the battle's getting a little too hot for his taste. You know, Morveer prefers to be skulking around in the background more so than in the thick of the action. So he's gone. Meanwhile, we've got mercenaries versus Osprian soldiers. And in the chaos of battle, Manza is seeking out Faithful Carpi. And this is when we get this moment where he runs down Faithful Carpi with the horse, and they're having this dialogue in the water, and you know, Faithful Carpi's doing this thing where it's like, I was faithful, I was, you know, I followed Casca, I followed you, and then I followed Orzo. And then there's this reveal that Orzo gave the same speech to Faithful that he did to Manza, which is like, he said that, you know, the old way is out and that there needs to be a new ruler, and I was fit for the job and all of that. And Manza actually feels kind of regretful in these moments. It's kind of interesting. She goes to, again, she's contemplating like sparing his life, but before she could make that decision, his coat, his scarf, whatever it is, it gets caught in a water wheel. And he goes under the water, gets drowned, and then comes back up and is like run through this water wheel. It's a very elaborate and violent death.
Well, I would say she does make the decision, though, Charles.
She tries to save him.
She does try to save him, and she pulls in, and it wasn't to be. And it is kind of this moment where she knows that it's her fault that he was even in that situation to begin with. But you're right. She, as someone who had been in a very similar situation and hadn't been able to say no, was able to see herself in him and feel empathy, and she tried. And I really do think that's the thing about Manza, and we'll get into this more when we do a character profile with her, but I think you see more and more this, there's a quote I can pull, which she says sarcastically, but I think is true, where I think she says it to Shivers. Maybe beneath this harsh yet beautiful shell, I'm really still a soft-hearted farmer's daughter, only wanting to do good. And when push comes to shove, she kind of, even the vengeance stuff, besides like GABA and when she's like drugged out with Ario and things like that, a lot of it, I think like more times than not that I've done the math, but more times than not, she's regretting it already while she's doing it or trying to stop it. We'll get to the moment with Shivers following through and things like that too. So
right, yes, we will. But for now,
she's good-hearted somewhere underneath all that, and
she's conflicted for sure, which is more than we can say about a lot of these characters. She's at least contemplating doing good sometimes. Sometimes her hand is played. Sometimes destiny gets in the way. And with Faithful Carpi, he claims to be loyal, and it's not until later on in this book that we realize the extent to which like he was. I mean, we know for the most part how loyal he was, but I think the reveal that Benna was trying to overthrow Orso plays a huge role in this too. So you kind of feel bad for Faithful, and he gets a pretty spectacular, I guess, for lack of a better word, death here. That's this bizarre watermill. yeah, memorable for certain. And if this was ever made into a movie, that would certainly be an interesting scene to see, to take away from this movie of like, oh, the water wheel scene, dude, that was extra. I figure like Tarantino, where it's gratuitous in its violence, but it's also entertaining at the same time. That's like a really strong vibe that I get from this, where it's like spectacularly like gory and horrific, but it's somehow entertaining as well. And that's kind of the fine line that this book achieves every once in a while. So long, faithful Carpi. There's only a few people left now, as and then so we have Casca and Friendly. So actually, no. Here's what I don't want to get ahead of myself, because Manza marches to the Thousand Swords, and she's like, "Well, Faithful's gone. It's now time for me to take my rightful place and return to the throne." And before she can sit in the chair, who returns, Dylan? Who returns to us in a moment of, I guess, surprise? Glory, would you say? Fame? Fortune?
Yeah, definitely fame. Definitely a famed soldier of fortune who gets in there, and there's this awesome build up toward it where Manza comes back in and she's like, yeah, I feel like you might want to go to new leadership or whatever. And they're like, well, we were thinking someone who, like maybe an old leader. And she's like, this is going even better than I could have imagined. Yeah. And they were going just even older and further back than her, because they'd already gone back to Casca. And the thing with Casca is that the Thousand Swords are mercenaries, and no one has done a better job of getting them that beautiful ratio they're looking for of minimal fighting to maximum pay than Casca. It's like, because she's like, who's made you richer than me? And it's like, well, Casca over here can make us, I can't remember if he'd made them richer or not, but at least the close enough.
They weren't actually fighting, which was the difference.
They're not fighting.
They don't actually. Yes. The irony here is that mercenaries, the number one thing they don't want to do is fight, even though that's technically their job. They're soldiers for hire. They would much prefer not to go to war and to fight in battles, and no one understands that and advocates for that more than Nicomo Casca, famed soldier of fortune. And I remember the first time I read this book, I was like, I'll believe it when I see the body. I just couldn't fully believe that Casca was gone. I'm like, this roguish character was like, go on without me. I'll be like, it was great just to know you. I was like, yeah, okay, Casca, I'll believe it when I see the body. And so, yeah, he's back. A welcome face, in my opinion. I was happy to see him return and to sit at the head of the Thousand Swords, and pledging his allegiance to Orso, of all people. Well, that was just quite the twist. And yet another zigzag in this revenge plot of who's getting a revenge against whom, and how, when, what. And this is like, is Casca getting revenge on Manza now? Like, this is how it's all being built up.
Yeah, for sure. And there is that moment, Charles, if for the audiobook listeners, when you get Friendly leaving and he runs into an old face that he remembers.
Oh, yeah.
And you get the just unmistakable Casca voice from Stephen
The audiobook does betray that.
Yes,
that scene.
Like, so, yeah,
I remembered that. Yeah. I was like, this was not the intention of the books to give away that it's Casca, but Stephen Spacey puts on the Casca voice, and you're like, oh, this is obviously Casca. But I mean, I had already read the book once before, so it was what it was. But yeah, it's just I remember that was kind of a funny audiobook moment.
Yeah, I've bounced around in my reads from doing physical and doing audio, and it's funny the different experience you get when you do audio where you're like, oh, that's not a twist now. It's just because Pacey's voices are so distinct for each character, and Casca especially. So, yeah, but it's fun to get Casca back in the fray. We didn't want to see him go so easy.
And he switched sides.
Then we get a lot more. Yes.
He's pledged allegiance to Orso. Well, we'll get there because now the line is drawn in the sand here. We have Casca and Orso, and we have Monza and the Grand Duke Rogan. Now, Monza's dining with Rogan. It seems like the end is inevitable. It's a grim, dire situation, juxtaposed against these moments with Casca, where you have Colonel, how do you say his name? Rigrat? Colonel Rigrat?
Sure.
Anyway.
That doesn't sound right, but sure.
It does not sound right at all, but it's Rigrat? Anyway. Regret, sure.
Regret?
And
sure.
Rugrat? And...
Nope.
And he's like, we need to charge right now on the front lines. And Casca's like, whoa. Like, these men have done enough fighting for one day. We need to hold out and we will surge in the charge in the hour of glory. You know, we have our team's morale to think about. You know, he's getting, like, you know, as pompous as he's ever been. He's full-blown Casca in his leadership role. So it's funny to see those moments, and it all turns out to be this grand ruse that Casca has taken money from the Gurkish to not attack, which is like such a Casca thing to do. He gets paid tons of money to do nothing, and it's a stroke of brilliance. It's a dream for Casca and for his merry band of mercenaries. And he also kills one of his captains, and Friendly just, you know, he just sees what's going on and does his best to contribute by killing Regra, I don't know. And Casca steps out of the tent and he's like, oh, that brave Captain Andiche, or whatever his name is. He saved Andiche. He saved my life. And I owe everything to him.
Well, he keeps going after, so he goes through this process of killing each of them, and for the first two, I think both times, he's like, my fault! It's like, all my fault! Like, and I just love Casca hamming it up like that. He actually hams it up so much that the final time, the guy's onto him already, but we'll get around.
Yeah, he hams it up a bit too much. Yeah, he wasn't covering his tracks too. I think he was having too much fun with it, you know, where it's like, he's such a brave, valiant man. We must honor his memory, like all these other things. And you're like, okay, Casca, like, you can only get away with that for so long. So you have Rogan.
Because he pins it. He pins it on Rigrat or whatever, the colonel, because he's like, if I had not taken that money to not attack, then it would be like he would still be alive and here with me. And it's like, I just love Casca, like, taking the blame for it, but in a way that's like, he's still a hero. It's just vintage, because it's like, I know I saved many lives today, but his could not be one of them, so it's my fault. It's just vintage.
I blame myself, you know. It's like, yeah, you should, because you stabbed him in cold blood. And it's just one of those amazing moments. And, you know, Rogan is beside himself. He was able to use Gurkish gold to buy off the 1,000 swords, and he also did a whole lot of nothing to achieve success as well. He let all his allies do all the fighting while he was retreating until he became the most powerful one, but then he started losing, and then he got in bed with the Gurkish, and it paid off. And you get this funny moment when, like, Casca and Monza actually finally talk to each other after this twist was revealed, where Casca's like, I gave my life for you. And Monza's like, you didn't effing die. And Casca goes, well, rumors of my death are often exaggerated. Wishful thinking on the part of my many enemies. And Monza goes, I'm beginning to know how they feel. So it's like... he
dropped that line, like, him and Monza dropped that line together in the big fight, too. Where it's like, he delivers the first part of it. He's like, wishful thinking, and Monza finishes it where she's like, on the part of his many enemies. So it's like this epic moment, and in classic Abercrombie fashion, he gives us the epic moment, and then he's like, no, like, why would that be the last moment? Like, life it doesn't always work out that way with the climax, and then then the character dies an epic death. Sometimes they just kick around and go back to drinking later.
Yeah, and total Casca embellishment to be like, I gave my life for you. I sacrificed myself. It's like, no, you didn't. You didn't. And so it's just like a really funny scene there that I always appreciated. So this battle was very intense. Manza was in the charge, in the thick of it. Same with Shivers, and like this battle had everyone kind of shaken, and we get this really interesting, I say interesting, love scene between what we think is Manza and Shivers, and then it's like this switcheroo in the narrative, in the prose, that it's actually Manza and Rogant, and Shivers and Carla Dan Eider. And this was a scene that honestly I found to be a bit confusing. I'm just going to come out there and be honest with it. Like, the way it was delivered, I was like, wait, what's happening? To who? To when? And I had to, like, think about it for a second. I don't know. This was, like, the one part that just, like, I just got to be honest, it didn't quite work for me. And I thought it was a bit complicated. I get the intent of it. Like, we want to think that Manza and Shivers are back together. And it's this gut-wrenching twist that they couldn't be further apart. But it was a tricky thing to try and do in the narrative by having us believe it and then like very slowly strip away the, like, adding more details to make us realize that wasn't the case. Like, and in the audiobook, I just thought I had skipped something. I was like, wait, what's happening? Who's doing what to who? I'm so confused. And it's just Abercrombie having a fun twist on our expectations, subverting our assumptions, that I said at the S word.
Yes, the one we're allowed to say on our clean podcast. So I think that, the thing about it being confusing, I don't think confusing is necessarily a sign that the scene didn't deliver on its intention. Like, I think it is supposed to be somewhat confusing, but I'll say it also the scene doesn't particularly work for me either, for, I would say, different reasons. Not that it was confusing, but that it just, like, I guess at this point I'm not invested in the Manza and Shivers relationship.
Right.
So if it's like trying to play on my emotions of like, but I want Shivers and Manza to be together, it's like, I don't know, it didn't like pull the rug out from under me, which I think is what it's supposed to do here. So a rare miss for both of us in terms of our taste.
Very rare
of what we were looking for from Joe Abercrombie, because we're usually all on board, but just, didn't work for us here. But, in a giant, or I don't know if it's a giant book, in a sizable book, it's normal to have at least one moment that doesn't work for you, and I'm happy to keep rolling toward a lot of the moments that did.
I agree. And one of those moments that did is when Casca has Friendly deliver Count Foscar to Manza. Count Foscar, remember, was the one that looked up to Benna, and Manza actually had fond feelings and this kind of this innocent nature around Foscar, and Manza is actually reluctant to kill Foscar. And we've seen this reluctance now for Faithful as well, and for the squatters at her safe house. And Manza's really not this kind of, she's trying to make these decisions, but who steps in without missing a beat? Good old Shivers.
And it's a brutal scene that almost harkens to me back to when Logan Nine Fingers just smashed Bethod's head in.
Yes.
It's like just one of these brutally violent, I have given way to this way of being, like this violent way of being, smash this person's head in when they're at my mercy. And it is one of those moments that you like to point out a lot there, Charles, where it's like in a book that is so funny sometimes and so entertaining and even silly at times, then just this like brutal violence that's juxtaposed against it. And it's always stuck with me for being that, especially because it happens to this guy who's an innocent.
Yeah, and Manza was willing to forgive him, I believe. And Shivers is like, that's not what we're here to do. Like, you started us down this path of vengeance, and to stop now. Like, no half measures here. Caution first always. Not what he said, but
well, that I don't know if he'd
but
think
definitely
of that as
like
caution.
no, he didn't. But it's basically like that's what we're here to do, right? Vengeance and such. It's like that's just what we're here for. It does harken to Bethod, and yeah, it's just another one of these shocking moments of violence where it's like when you decide to seek vengeance, like this is the kind of reaction you need to be comfortable with expecting. It's like you can't like shy away from these moments when you say you're going to kill all these people and get those wheels in motion. This is the result.
Yeah, and I think this is more and more what we're getting to at this point in the novel is what I think I'm starting to build toward what I think the novel's really about. I know I teased in part 1 that I don't really think it's about revenge, and this is showing up as Monza trying to be the Butcher of Capriel, the Snake of Talons, trying to be the person that everyone thinks that she is, and just struggling with it because that's not who she actually is. And more as we get toward these people who aren't just vile people, we are dealing with Monza being like, is this something that I've ever actually wanted? Is vengeance? Is that me? Because this is something that, of course, the Snake of Talons would want if they were thrown out a window. But is it something that I, Monza, the actual person behind that story, that myth, would want here? And she's, I think at this point, basically realized with Foskar, no, I wouldn't want that. But she's now responsible for what happened to Shivers and the path that she set them out on. So that's something she'll have to continue to grapple with, and we'll keep going and talk more about where it goes. Yeah,
but let's juxtapose that against Shivers' character arc. This was someone who was trying to be a better man at the beginning and has now gone full like merciless killing machine. And there's a scene that happens right around here where Carla Den Eider is like, you're surprisingly blunt, and Shivers is like, no, I'm about as blunt as you'd expect for a one-eyed killer, where he's just like, this is just who I am now. He's kind of like, his character arc is almost the opposite of Monza's, and that's kind of how they continue to grow apart, where Shivers is living up to this merciless butcher like character, and Monza's looking for more and is trying to distance herself from it. So and just how revenge has gotten them all wrapped up in this character growth is so interesting. It's like the similar revenge arcs, but that have affected them in exactly the opposite ways, and to the point where revenge becomes this meaningless thing. It's really quite interesting. Like, this is what to me makes Abercrombie like so brilliant. He's thought about these things, he's hit them from so many angles, and to the point where it all just comes down to like, it's just like the the chaos of life. Essentially, it's like some of these things that we put so much meaning behind just start to unravel when you try and bring sense to it, and it's just the absurdity sometimes of violence and life. It's fun.
Yeah, that word fun again, Charles, after the absurdity of violence in life. But I'll say that I agree. I think it's really well said, all these things about Abercrombie and how he views these things, because I think so much of how Abercrombie likes to write is about, he writes stories about how people tell themselves stories of who they're trying to be in a lot of ways. And I think this is another one of them. And oftentimes where they miss some of the very pragmatic, just like simple truths that could be there. And we're in what we think is a revenge story, and we're with Monza as someone who thinks she should want revenge. And then we get these lines from people like Casca, again, dropping wisdom, saying things like, you could forget about revenge, you could compromise, you could be merciful. And he says that to Monza at one point, and it's like brushed off by her, and it's also easily brushed off by the reader, because it's like, what do you mean? I'm reading a revenge story called Best Served Cold. Of course she's going to go get revenge. But it's like, no, like Casca's right. Like, theoretically, you could just stop, not kill anyone.
Yeah, I would say this is most definitely a story about revenge, but like the thesis is what you're saying, is that there's like the pursuit of revenge is not like the not the experience I'm trying to convey in this work. He's almost trying to convey like, oh, everyone has their own reasons in their head for getting revenge, and the results are, chaotic almost and meaningless almost, and it's these attempts, like Casca's trying to get through, that have the real meaning. So I would say it is absolutely about revenge. It's just the end result in Abercrombie fashion has nothing to do with revenge. It's like revenge is not the focus we're having here.
I think the story is about acceptance of your identity and those around you, and I'll tell you more as we keep going. And revenge is the tool with which Abercrombie tells that story.
Yes, yes. Yeah. I would agree. It's through revenge that the pursuit of revenge, that we actually reveal these stories that we tell ourselves versus the people that we are versus the people we're trying to be, and all of that. And the fact that you would, put it under this tight thing of, oh, I want revenge. It's like, do you though? It's like, it's not that simple. It's also this idea about yourself that you've built up in your head, like you're saying. And that to me is what is most interesting about Best Served Cold. It's well said.
Yeah. And I'll have more to say on it too as we keep rolling, because I'm excited when we get to like the final moments when
right.
I think drives
so
home for me.
Manza's now crowned the Grand Duchess of Talons, and the people are loving her. And we are also, basically, things are winding down, and we are laying siege to Orzo's fortress in Fontezarmo, and Casca is leading this tunnel-digging, Gurkish gunpowder expedition while the crowning is going on. And then you also, in this third plot line, you have Morvir, who is now recruited by Orso to get revenge on Manza. So Morvir has completely switched sides, and he's attempted to poison all of these people on Orso's list very unsuccessfully. You can see like the story he's telling about himself starting to unravel here. He's had moments of incompetence sprinkled throughout this whole book, but then he does have this stroke of brilliance to poison the crown. Like, this opportunity lies at his feet. They literally drop the crown right in front of where he was hiding and leave. And it's actually quite a fun, brilliant little device here where he poisons the crown, and part of the ceremony is all of the dukes and all of these great leaders to show their support to now King what's his name, Rogant, that they all put simultaneously. They put the crown on his head, so they all end up getting poisoned except for Manza, right, Dylan?
Because she's wearing a glove.
That's
so
right.
Right? Was it Gaba who stepped on her hand? I think.
I believe
so. Saved her life.
Yes.
So
saved her.
Yeah.
life.
So she's still left. Looks awfully suspicious, and we get to that in that kind of final conference scene later. But yeah, Manza makes it, and then it's kind of this situation where Manza's the one ruler left, and she's kind of like, well, her and Orso, and we know where that's going.
That's right, because we have these like funny scenes with Casca in the tombs with Caesarea, another one of his generals or captains, I believe. And he tries to kill Caesarea or something and fails, and then they get into this crazy like scuffle romp thing, and it ends with this huge explosion that from the Gurkish gunpowder. And it describes like Casca's like, I just hear this ringing in my ears. It's really bizarre, because I guess they've never like heard an explosion, heard an explosion before, and it takes down the whole wall. He does the same thing where he's like, oh, poor Caesarea, he bravely tried to light the gunpowder and it got the best of him. And then meanwhile, this other captain is noticing that like his sword is missing and all these other things, and is like, dude, are you for real right now? Like, you can tell that he's not buying it. The last captain is like, yeah, okay, Casca, that happened. And it's just another funny, Casca goes real far into this whole, like, oh no, poor Caesarea. He was such a brave man. I loved him so much. His sacrifice will never be forgotten. It's just absolute craziness. And it all comes to, now that the gate is blown off, we are now doing this final siege of Orso's castle. And it's in this moment that Shivers actually betrays Manza in this revenge, I guess, for Manza's betrayal and for the eye situation. And he doesn't really have like a great reason for it. He's like, I guess I'll just betray you now because that's what I want to do, because we've had a falling out and this is all your fault basically. And he admits it's not a great reason, I believe, but he's still willing to do it, which is a really interesting arc. Not what you'd expect from what was originally the like romantic couple,
Yeah, and I will say that Shivers has opportunities to finish Manza off that he doesn't take, and at least what we get from the prose of it is like he wants her to be aware of what's going on and he wants her to like look him in the eyes, like those kind of moments, but he doesn't pull the trigger, so to speak, when he does have opportunities. And then we know that Friendly comes in for the save.
Yes, Friendly, because Casca had his suspicions, like, Friendly, don't let anything happen to Manza.
Right.
So now Friendly intervenes, and they're pretty well matched, Shivers and Friendly. It's a fun battle that gets cut short. It gets cut short by Shank, who just kind of swats Shivers like a fly and sends him like flying into a wall or something. It was a lot, and he's like, "What the heck was that?" Just this eater force, this eater power that was able to put an end to the fight.
Yeah, I mean, Shivers and Friendly are both extremely competent mortal warriors, and then Shank comes in total another power level, and it's just they're playthings to him. So he bursts through, and he's a man on a revenge mission himself in a way. So he's
right.
He just knocks Shivers aside, and we won't see Shivers again until he's on what he thinks is death row. That's
right. But before we get there, we have our Morveer arc coming to an end, and our Casca, Prime Casca, because I really enjoy this scene. Casca's playing cards with Victus during the whole siege, right? They're like their part's done. They blew up the wall and they're playing cards and having a drink, and Victus is like, there's this moment where Casca was just a little bit too slow to the draw, and Victus whips out the crossbow and is like, "How dumb do you think I am, Casca? Like, you gotta be kidding me with all this showboating." And Casca's like, this is unfortunate. Yeah. But because of Morveer, who this whole time is like, oh, Casca's an alcoholic, he can never change, this, that, and the other thing.
Yeah.
He's like, I'll poison the alcohol and this drunkard will die instantly. And what actually happens, Victus drinks the wine, gets poisoned, dies. Casca, it is revealed, the whole time was drinking out of the flask casually tossed to him by Morveer, but he was drinking goat milk, which was suggested to him way back by Duke Salier because it was good for indigestion or good for digestion or something like that. And Casca's like, okay, I'll remember that. It's so funny.
Yeah, it's a fantastic moment, and for me, this is a very fun reveal where it's because. And he's like, I've been telling you this whole time that I was going to change my ways. Like, why wouldn't you believe me? And it's another Casca, like I said in part one, like the under promise and over deliver type thing, where it's like he comes off as the kind of person who would never actually even temporarily quit And we've got Morveer on this, like, just reveling in the what he feels is the irony of the situation of how Casca's going to die because of alcohol and it was poisoned. And Morveer, congratulations on his own
He like
genius.
jumps out and is
And
like,
then
aha! Like, you have been poisoned by me, a grand poisoner, master poisoner, Morveer. And he's like, no, actually. I've been drinking goat milk this whole time. And I love the goat. I forgot to mention the scene where they're like, the captain for Orso, representing Orso, is trying to get Casca to charge. And he's like, you need to charge now. They're waiting for you to, like, relieve them. And he's like, calm down, man. Take a look at my goat. And then it's like the goat was just, like, sitting there. And he's like, see how it's relaxed? Like, why can't you take a lesson from his book and just relax? And then the captain doesn't even know how to respond and just walks away. So it's like these subtle moments that were weaved in of, like, why does Casca have a goat? It's like these funny little quirks that turned out to be highly calculated for Casca to outmaneuver someone as conniving as Morveer is a funny little twist. And he does it by being so honest and direct. Like, I told you I changed. Like, I'm a changed man. You didn't believe me. You got wrapped up in your own head and you died because of it.
Yeah, Casca's such a master of deception that he knows that everyone's expectation that he will lie is the best. Like, telling the truth ends up being the best deception that he can give, because that's the least believable thing is what Casca tells you. So
yes.
It's a pretty amazing moment and a great delivery on this Casca and Morveer interaction that's been happening throughout. I love this moment.
Yes. Yeah, it's a great moment. Fun reveal. I love the goat milk. So thanks to Casca's goat milk, he is spared. Morveer is no more. And that leaves us free and clear for Manza to confront Orso. And it's in these moments that they both realize the truth, that Benna had worked on a betrayal of Orso alone without Manza's knowledge. He was orchestrating this usurp of Orso. And we've been, like, after we finally had all of these flashbacks, it's like, oh, he would totally do that. This is someone that just stabbed a merchant to steal his gold. This is someone who, like, ordered the massacre of Capriel without telling Manza. Like, this is someone who time and time again has been willing to make these unsavory, selfish, violent decisions. And it's so part of his narrative now at this point that Manza's like, oh no, Benna, how, like, what were you thinking? I never wanted any of this. And I think Orso's realizing that Manza never knew as well. So they're both having this moment of like, what? Like, we were both on the same page this whole time, and it was stupid Benna's fault, and he's the one that's dead. And like, but now we're in this irrevocable situation now. And Shank enters the scene, and Orso's like, oh, you got it now. Shank is here. And then Shank is like, actually, I'm here for Manza. So poor Orso, no friends left. And Manza at least delivers a quick, merciful death to Orso. And Orso's like, that's it? And she's like, yeah. Very unsatisfying end to what should be like this Kill Bill moment of like, this is Bill. It's like, nope. It's pretty simple, pretty quick. And just like that, her quest for revenge is basically she killed everyone on her list.
Unsatisfying for Manza, perhaps, but satisfying in the story that Joe Abercrombie is telling, which at this point the idea of a kill of the main villain, I think it's probably fair to call Orso a villain, but yeah, a kill of the main person she's been seeking after ends up feeling like almost tangential to the point by the end of it. It just makes sense in the story that Abercrombie's telling.
Yes, absolutely. And now that Orso's dead, we get every character individually. We get their plot lines all wrapped up as it comes to the end. Who should we start with first, Dylan?
Well, I guess we can go like Morveer is just an easy one to
Right.
like Morveer is an easy one to just crank out. Like he gets during that conference scene,
Yeah.
he gets to be the scapegoat. And Monza is like, let's build up his reputation as much as possible, and let's pretend that he really was this unbelievable master poisoner, and he's still at large to keep his myth alive.
Yeah.
And like death itself, Morveer. And yeah, so it's an interesting, for a man who loved irony, Morveer
Yeah.
gets this kind of ironic, like larger than life lives forever type ending,
Yeah.
but he's dead, so he doesn't get to see it.
Right. And even Vitari's like, that's more than he deserves. And he's like, yeah, but it's a convenient
Yeah.
narrative for us now, like, so let's roll with it. So in a way, he kind of gets what he wanted, and that plot line gets wrapped up. I'd say the other one we can do now, but I think we'll have a lot more to say, is Friendly and Casca. Because
Sure.
I love these final moments with Friendly and Casca. Friendly, of course, his one wish was to get permission to go back to what's the name of the prison? It's not Solitude, is it? It's
Safety.
Safety. Yes. So all he wants to do is go back to Safety, where everything has a routine, everything is numbered and organized, and he's just never felt more comfortable in a place. And they're like riding up to the gates of Safety, and Casca's like, are you sure this is really what you want? Like, we could work so well together, we could have all these great moments together. And he's like, this is what I want. And then they realize that Safety is no more. There's no more conflict in Styria, and there's just, the prison has been neglected and shut down.
Yeah, so Casca was... I want to get more into the Casca-friendly relationship when we do our Casca character profile, Charles, so we won't get too much into it now. But Casca was telling Friendly about, like, hey, you have what I lack, I have what you lack, we are both very lacking, but together we can be great. And he's trying to convince Friendly of all these things. And Friendly still wants to go back to Safety. He's so proud of his... He has this letter that's like to be in prison forever, signed by Monza. It was the only thing he asked from her. And he's imprisoned until any point in which he wants to leave, which he's like is never going to happen. And yeah, he doesn't get that chance, and he's going to end up hanging out with Casca anyway. So it ends up being a not what Friendly wanted, but pretty much his second favorite thing after Safety was being with Casca and the Thousand Swords. So
yeah, it's funny that he's like, oh, I hope the prison opens sometime soon, reopens one day. He's kind of like hoping for that. And Casca's like, it's okay. And he has this great line, and Dylan, you're so good at pulling the quotes. I don't want to put pressure on you, but maybe you can find it, about Casca and change. Where do you have it?
Yeah, I wanted to. I almost read it last episode. He's drinking again. He goes, change, Friendly. Change is a funny thing. Sometimes men change for the better. Sometimes men change for the worse. And often, very often, given time and opportunity, he waved his flask around for a moment, then shrugged. They change back. And it's just brilliant. And I really think that's how Joe Abercrombie thinks of people.
Yes.
And that's another reason why I'm like, Casca ends up being a more direct, like, Abercrombie conduit than most, because that's what Abercrombie's writing implies. Is like, yeah, sometimes people do change for the better. I think that that does happen for some characters in the First Law. It does happen. Like, I think Glocta changes for the better in the First Law trilogy, although it had a while to go and all that kind of stuff. Jazal changes for the better in a lot of ways in the First Law trilogy. Even Mons, I would say, changes for the better, at least from where she was when she was at her vengeance point.
Right.
But all that being said, it's like the most typical, and a lot of people change for the worse. Shivers did by the end
even
of
though
this
like
one.
Jazal, where he changes for the better, but his situation gets way, way worse.
Right. But I think the most typical Abercrombie way of viewing humanity and change is like, first of all, it's non-linear, meaning like even when they make changes, there's going to be backslides,
Right.
and there's going to be these moments where they change back, and sometimes your whole life is just is just backsliding back and forth and never really making any changes. And I think that's what happens often, and it happens to Casca.
Yeah, to have Casca drinking alcohol again too.
Yeah,
so
he's like
sometimes, it's like, hey, I am what I am. I change back. It happens. And he's trying to warm, friendly up to the idea of change, and he's like, we complement each other so well. We both have what the other one completely lacks, and it's an interesting comparison to make. And so that's friendly and Casca. And I think next we got to go to, meanwhile, in the dungeons beneath Fontesarmo, Shivers is on death row. And he's pretty much accepted it. I mean, he's just like, well, this is my situation right now, and it's only a matter of time. And this was all for nothing. And like, what a waste of time this was. And then who shows up but, Manza herself. And we get these moment where Manza's like, here's my ring, this ring that's been going around the whole book. And he's like, take it and leave and never come back. And he, like, Shivers is basically almost like bemused at this. And he's like, okay, it's like, I guess I'll go back to the north now. And he has this line where it's like, so that's how this ends, is it? That's the ending? And Manza's like, you think you deserve something better? Mm-hmm. Like, what do you think this is? And
it's a meta moment too.
Yes, exactly. Super meta, super very much in the line of Abercrombie's humor, where it's like, what did you ever think would happen to Shivers and Manza? It's like, how many times has I made this clear that it was nothing special, like in the sense that there was no romance, and the fact that there was nothing special.
There was potential for it at one point, and then it did, and this is how a lot of relationships go: is there's that potential for romance, and then something is done or said, like an eye is burned out, and then that person accuses the other one or says like it should have been you, and usually after that the relationship does not work out, and that's what happens. And then we get this meta moment, like you're saying, Charles, of so that's the ending. You think you deserve something better, and Manza might as well be saying that to us as the readers. Like, you think you deserve a happier, better, like more tie it all together ending for these two? No. This is an Abercrombie novel, and I don't like to give you that. And I like to give you something that feels real. And I think he does that here. And I have a Shivers quote.
Sure.
He walks away thinking this, Charles. He was a better man. Of that he had no doubt. A wiser man. Used to be he was his own worst enemy. Now he was everyone else's. And I don't know. We talked a little bit. Is Shivers being more honest with himself or less honest with himself? And I'm going to say that this is a moment for me to tease that we'll get more into that in our Shivers character profile.
Heyo. Definitely a great tease with the Shivers character profile there, Dylan. Well done. And that gives us the opportunity to shift our focus to the last remaining main character here, and that is Manza. And after meeting with her counselors, we have the Grand Duchess of Talons, Manza, who is pregnant with Shivers' child, with the former King Rogant of all of Styria's child. Who's to say? But she's feeling very optimistic. And while she's bemusing herself over these thoughts, who is to visit but a representative from Valant and Bach, none other than Yoru Sulfur, who has popped in and out of the First Law trilogy consistently, revealed that he was an eater, which was a huge revelation in the First Law trilogy. And it is a warning sign here at the end of this book. And he offers Manza the backing of the respected banking house of Valant and Bach. But Manza is basically like, nah, dude, I'm good. And then Yoru Sulfur starts almost threatening her, actually definitely threatening her, being like,
Yes.
"Oh, are you sure? Like the bank has lots of influence. You'd be really bummed out if you said no to this deal." And then who walks?
And he's physically threatening her because he's like, we're all alone, you and me, in this room.
Yeah,
And his like teeth are glinting, I think, those kind of things.
right, right.
And then, yeah, go on, Charles.
Then she's also been like, "Oh yeah, well your buddy Ishri came as well, and I just a few days before, and I told her no, and then that just kind of escalates your Sulfur's threats, and then just as he starts to get threatening physically, as you had mentioned, Dylan, who steps in out of the shadows but Shanked, and they are staring each other down, and Shanked is kind of revealing some of this history of like like anything that he does, I unravel, something like that, which is really interesting. He's seeking vengeance on Baez, and he now destroys everything that he tries to achieve. And that this idea that Monza went off on this surge of revenge just conveniently worked out for Shank the whole time. It was something that he was hoping to do by keeping her alive. He's like, I kept you alive because Baez wanted you dead, so that's what I'm all about. And that was an interesting glimpse into the larger theater being played here, the larger stage of this theater between Baez and Khalul. And Monza somehow manages to ride this third party and find her own very unique wedge in this game. Which, how does that have implications in the future? Who's to say? This is the last book that I've read of the First Law trilogy, so I do not know where the story continues to go. But it opens up a lot of potential here that there may be a third player in the game. Even though it seems to be quite a small one right now, there seems to be a lot of promise here. And who knows how it will play out in the future, but it has me excited, Dylan. It has me excited.
Yep. And I will refrain from any comment about what's going to happen in the future books to keep this spoiler free. But I will say that it's revealed in this moment that not only is Shanked out there trying to destroy what Baez is doing, but Shanked is also a former apprentice of Baez's. And we get this sense of, so we also had found out already that Shanked was Vitari's, I guess the father of Vitari's children is probably the best way to speak to that.
I would say so.
Yeah, and we get this sense that he is, I think, trying to do these little goods in the midst of doing a lot of what he sees as necessary bads. Like he's trying to spare one person if he can and those kind of things. But he's seeing it too with this like Machiavellian approach where it seems like he thinks Baez is pure evil, and he might not be wrong.
Yeah.
And he's like, if I can just do the opposite of Baez, it doesn't really matter what it takes. It's probably a good influence on the world. So
not a bad take, an interesting take for certain.
So shall we talk about Monza's end here, Charles?
Yeah, let's bring Monza home and then call it an episode here.
Yeah. So yeah, we get that moment where she's releasing shivers. We also get Monza as this person who has, like, I think you mentioned this, Charles. There's some like acceptance that she's reached and ability to be a leader, actually trying to do the right things, and with this good balance of ruthlessness and mercy. She shows Shivers mercy, and she's kind of more in touch with herself by the end of this. And I think if she's basically the ruler of Styria at this point, and she's pregnant and stuff. And she has gone through what I see as growth that stems from understanding who her brother actually was. Like that's the real moment of truth for her, where then totally shatters a story she's been telling herself of her as the ruthless person who is in charge of everything, just trying to protect her harmless little brother who she's been looking out for since they were little kids, and he was so pure and all this kind of stuff. It's finally all shattered, and when she's able to see Benna for the snake that he was.
Yes.
The
good choice
butcher
of
that he
phrase there.
was,
Yes,
Charles.
yes.
Yes, exactly. When she's able to see him that way, she's able to say, oh crap, like I was in this codependent relationship with my brother in every way possible. Like that's as codependent as it gets, right? And he was all of those things that everyone was pinning on me and that I was coming to tell myself that I was. And when she sees Benna for what he is, she's able to accept herself as someone who actually has some of that like good-natured side of her. And in fact, that good-natured side of her was the reason why she felt such a desire to care for Benna so closely and kind of give in to him and kind of be agreeable with him and let him do all of his crap and to try to see the best in him. And I think finally when she's able to slough off all of the extra weight and skin that was coming from Benna's really awful, vile stuff he was doing, she's able to be this like measured person who's come to accept herself. And I think the big moment for that is she, Benna's ring that he gave to her has been kind of floating around throughout this story this whole time. And people see it as her ring, but she knows it's Benna's ring. Like, right? Like Shanked, I think, is following her and like finds a ring. It's like, oh, it's Monza's ring. I'm getting close. But it's been Benna's ring the whole time. And the way that she leaves off the story, her final scene, is that she just tosses the ring to Shivers, basically. Like she's like, I don't need this anymore. And Shivers is like, oh, great, a ring. Like, I can pawn this. Yeah. It's like no idea of the significance of this thing. But to me, that moment is this moment of Monza saying, I'm done with Benna. I'm done with that side of things. And I'm going to be me now. But she's kind of handing off the baton to Shivers, who's now on his own path of, let's see where this takes him, of thinking he's this awful, terrible person who's everyone's enemy. And we don't know where that will go for Shivers, but that's how I see it.
No, I agree 100%. I think that's very well said, Dylan. And it's, to me, this whole time, with every act of horrible violence that happens as a result of Monza's Monza's quest for violence, it's a test where she's not quite sure how to feel. And sometimes she feels, bloodthirsty and gratified. Sometimes she wants to be merciful. She's really, without Benna, she's, like you said, she was so codependent with her relationship with Benna that now in a Benna-less world, she doesn't know what to do and how to feel. And the more she discovers about herself now that she's on her own, I would say, the more she comes into her own. And it's through all these several different acts of violence. Some were, her hitting a guy with a hammer and feeling good or neutral about it. And others were, watching innocent people get killed and feeling regretful about it. And it was never simple and it was never consistent. And it's that complication that I find so interesting. It's almost like her path of self-discovery. And like you said, this moment of tossing the ring is crucial because it's her moving on from who she was when she was with Benna. And now she is the Grand Duchess of Talons. She doesn't bow down to the bank or the church, which is a huge accomplishment. I don't think she realizes how big of an accomplishment that is, which is kind of interesting. She doesn't really know. She just knows that she doesn't want to be a part of it, which is interesting. Right. She's smart enough to know that. She's always had a good way of reading other people, but could she turn that high-powered perception back on herself? Not really. And I just think the Monza character is so great.
And she finally does. And I think we are kind of circling as we complete the Monza stuff toward the end here. So I'll see. Maybe this is what we'll I'll leave you with, but let me know, Charles, if you have more to say.
Sure.
Is I got one more Casca quote that I think is how, yeah.
All right, let's get to it.
Which I think is just him delivering truth, which is after Monza gives another like mercy and cowardice are the same type of BS line. Casca says, "Do you know why I always loved you, Monza? Even after you betrayed me, more after you betrayed me." He goes on to say, "Because I know you don't really believe any of that rubbish. Those are the lies you tell yourself so you can live with what you've done, what you've had to do." And that's how I see it.
Nice. I see it the same way. It's just a matter of like, look, we know what we're about, right? Like you and me have this understanding, and that's why I've had this connection with you. And we've seen a lot of touching bonding moments between Casca and Monza that have kind of transcended into the theme of this book and a lot of the hopeful themes of this book. So
yeah.
Well said, Dylan.
And that had to do piece is big because I don't think Monza's ever wanted to do those things. She's had to because of the situations that Benna put her in because she was always trying to take care of Benna. Right. And that's the had to do.
Yeah, she like accepted the responsibility of these actions that were just in many cases to a great extent out of her hands, and her ability to fit into that role to keep the ship going, is what Casca, Casca recognized that at all times, even when it meant him getting betrayed by her. He was like, I recognize that you are filling this role as part of what Benna did, and you are seeing through all the baloney. So that's a great quote. And
well said, Charles.
Thank you. A great find of a quote, Dylan. And this has been another awesome conversation around the first law. I'm so jazzed every time I read Abercrombie. This is a great book, and we have completed every book that I've ever read of Abercrombie. As we move forward, it will be my first experience with these books, and I don't know what's gonna happen, but I'm excited.
Well, I know what's gonna happen, and I'm so excited. I've been waiting so long, Charles, as you know, for you to catch up with Abercrombie.
I know, I'm so behind.
I think, but not for that much longer. We're gonna be ready for the Wisdom of Crowds in time to cover that, and around its release in September is the plan. It sounds like so. I'm just so pumped, Charles. It's going to be a great time.
Man, I'm so excited.
The Heroes. Your first time reading the Heroes is
first
going to be
time
coming
reading
up soon.
the Heroes. So, cannot wait. I have no idea what's in store for me, and that is an exciting feeling. So I am strolling confidently into those books. And I know from Abercrombie fashion, it's called The Heroes, but I cannot imagine it is about anyone being heroic by any stretch of the imagination. I have a sense of what Abercrombie thinks it means about, I can see his take on heroism, and I'm excited to see where he goes with it, but I know it's not the simple way. So
yes, that's well said, Charles. It will not be the simple way. It's always complex, it's always gray, and it's always Abercrombie.
But well said, Dylan, but before we can get to the Heroes, we have to wrap up Best Served Cold. What do you say to a little sweet, sweet outro music?
I say get that sweet, sweet outro music pumping, Charles. A pleasure as always talking Abercrombie with you. So let's bring it home.
Pleasure. That's all this was. Thank you all, and let's get that sweet, sweet outro music.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, one and all, for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. This has been your co-hosts, Charles and Dylan, talking Best Served Cold by Joe Abercrombie with you today. It was us. It was a pleasure. If you like what you heard, if you want to take part in the discussion after the show, well, the best place to do that is over on Twitter, and that is at the FTF Podcast with a number 1 at the end. It is also on Instagram at the FTF Podcast. Now, Dylan, if someone wanted to support the show beyond social media and they just so happen to be listening on Apple Podcasts, what can they do?
toss 5 stars to our podcast. Just find that Friends Talking Fantasy page on the Apple Podcast app, click the Friends Talking Fantasy page, scroll down past all those episodes until you start seeing stars. Once you're seeing stars, the optimal number of stars to click to support the show would be 5 of them. If you have a little bit of extra time and want to go that next step, writing a review is super helpful for a podcast like ours. But as always, just listening, giving us the chance to spend, what has it been? Over 3 hours between the 2 parts? The 2 different Best Served Cold episodes? Yeah. Over 3 hours of Best Served Cold discussion with another few hours to go with character profiles coming. That is more than enough listening to all this. So thank you so much. We appreciate you. This is
all so much for indulging all of our Abercrombie shenanigans. We greatly appreciate it. And as always, guys, go forth and conquer, friends.